choices. We all have choices to make, and we make them on a daily basis. 20 months ago, this congregation had a choice to stay here and try to do ministry from this facility, even though our costs were excessive, and it was putting a considerable financial strain on us in order just to maintain bricks and mortar and not ministry. And so the congregation chose to do something about that. Sell the facilities, build a newer, smaller facility, and have sufficient money left over to do continued ministry and preserve the longevity of this church for future generations. And that's a choice that up till now seems to be working. But we all have choices to make. Sometimes they don't turn out as well, and sometimes they do. 2 weeks ago, I had a choice to make, and I made a bad choice. I was driving along on Bicentennial, going north, and like we all do when we're driving, I had a choice to stay within the speed limit or exceed the speed limit. I chose to exceed the speed limit. Bad decision. One of McAllen's finest saw me, and he stopped me. And he told me it was quite a surprise I was going as fast as he said I was. He said I was going 61 in a 45-mile-an-hour zone. And I showed a very look of great surprise when he talked to me. And he said, well, I can prove it. And I said, I'm not arguing with you, officer. I know you're right. You have no reason to lie to me. And so he took my driver's license, he took my insurance information, and we were talking, and he said, do you still work? Because he noticed my age, and I said, oh yes. He said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a pastor. It didn't seem to make a lot of difference to him. He continued to write. Then he showed me what I had to do. That I had to call somebody to arrange whether I was going to take a class and go to court and pay the fine and whatever. And he had me sign the arrest warrant, or whatever you call it. He handed me the arrest citation. I turned on my ignition and I said, have a good day. And he had a beep on his computer. And he said, just a minute, sir. And so I waited. He talked. He took the license out of my hand. He rolled it up into a ball, and he handed it back to me. And he said, Jesus has just saved you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I made a mistake in writing the ticket, and the computer wouldn't accept it. And once the officer makes a mistake, he cannot rewrite the ticket. All I can do is give you a warning ticket. And he said, Jesus saved you. And as I left, I said, thank you, Jesus. So I made a bad decision, and it didn't turn out bad, all that bad. But I use it to point out we can make decisions in everything we do, and we have choices. And some don't end up that good. Someone has made a list of politically correct ways of indicating stupidity. And I think I could add some of my own, because I've done some of those throughout my life, and I'm sure you have too. Maybe you've heard some that are on this list. Some of them are quite creative that I thought I would share with you this morning to show you, to speak of somebody who has done something really dumb. What we might say he's a few clowns short of a circus, a few fries short of a Happy Meal. He doesn't have his cornflakes all in one box. The wheel's spinning, but the hamster is dead. He's missing a few buttons on his remote control, and the lights are on, but nobody's home. Have you ever noticed people do sometimes some really dumb things? Why do they do dumb things like that? I don't know. Haven't you ever done a dumb thing and then ask, why did I do such a dumb thing? Jesus told a parable about a farmer who sowed good seed in his field, but while he was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat. And so when the wheat sprouted, so did the weeds. And his servants came to him and they said, "Sir, don't you sow good seed in your field? If you did, where did all the weeds come from if you sowed good seeds?" And the farmer replied, "Well, that was an enemy that did that to me." And the servants asked, "Do you want us to go down and pull them up?" And he answered, "No." He said, "I don't want you to do that. If you pull up the weeds, you may pull up the wheat as well." He says, "Let both grow together until the harvest. And at that time, we'll collect both of them. The weeds will be tied in a separate bundle from the wheat, and we'll gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." Well, the implication from that parable is, I think, pretty clear. There are good folks and there are bad folks. The good folks come from God, and the bad folks come from the devil. One day there will be a judgment, and the good folks will be separated from the bad. The act of the sowing the weeds in another man's field as a form of revenge was very common in the time of Jesus, and there were actually laws banning such activities. It was against the law to plant weeds in another man's field. But wheats and tares look alike when they're growing. You can't tell the difference. And then finally, when they ripen, you can begin to tell the difference between the wheat and the weeds. And it's really just too bad if you happen to be one of those who turns out to be a weed. That is the plain, straightforward message from this parable. It's just too bad if you turn out to be one of the bad ones and not one of the good ones. But there is, I think, another part of this that the parable doesn't specifically address, that as disciples we think about. We think about that you do have a choice. And good folks sometimes do some stupid things. Doesn't mean you're one of those bad weeds because you've done some stupid things in your life. Our experience in life tells us life is not just as simple as this parable would make it seem to be. There are not people in white hats that run around this earth always doing good things, and people who wear black hats who are always going around the world doing bad things. The folks in white hats, that's us, sometimes do some stupid things. Fans of country music revere the name of George Jones. And Jones had enough hits as singles on his many albums to provide a career for many, many other country western singers. And at one time, George was nearly killed in an automobile accident, and he happened to be talking on his cell phone at the time he had his accident. And when the news came out of this accident and how serious it was, many of his fans just assumed that old George had fallen off the wagon again and was drunk. Because along with his talent, George was probably equally as known for the wild side of living in his life. He had a reputation for self-destructive behavior and wild living. And in the past, he had struggled with an addiction to drugs and to alcohol. And like most addicts and alcoholics, his determination to use was very seldom ever under control. He would do anything to get drunk. His wife, Tammy Wynette, one time took his car keys away from him, and he simply jumped on his riding lawnmower and drove 10 miles to the nearest bar. Why otherwise good people allow themselves to get trapped in self-destructive behavior is kind of hard to understand, but we do. And we sometimes ask where such behavior comes from. And can we get off the hook by saying, Flip Wilson style, the devil made me do it? Is it genetic? Are some people just born bad? No, my friends, we have choices. Journalist Bob Garfield, who specializes in writing on the quirky and unique aspects of human life, made a trip through Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1992, and he was doing a survey about quirky people and quirky things, and he thought that he had hit the mother lode of quirkiness there in Santa Fe. He met people from all walks of life who were trying to find healing or wholeness through a number of mystical processes or self-help therapy. He found in a Santa Fe health food store some highly unusual approaches to medicine. Rather than containing the average mix of vitamins and herbs that health food stores have, this store offered a vitamin and herb mixes called Luminous Spirit, Positive Attitude, Women's Courage, Emotional Rescue, Clearing Hate, Clearing Greed, Humiliation, and Children of Divorce. You could buy a pill for each one of those things at that health store. And he said, if only we could find emotional rescue or spiritual growth in a pill. But it's not easy. But he raises the question that I want to bring up. Where do we turn for help? First of all, we have to realize and we have to admit that life is made of choices. People are not born bad. People are not born good. Some people are even born in some very bad circumstances. And because of the circumstances of their life, they become scarred for life. And that is one reason we don't dare judge other people that we come in contact with, because we don't know what the conditions have been. We don't know how our lives would be different than they are today if we had been raised under other conditions than what we were raised. If we had had other paths to our life that led up until today, we don't know how our lives would have turned out. And so it doesn't pay us to judge others. But none of us ever lose the ability to choose right from wrong, good from evil. It's easy for us to forget that when we're faced with those tense situations in life, that we can actually choose how we respond. We don't have to leave it to just a reflex action. There was one stressful day for Eric Feldman and his sons. They set out in the late afternoon one day to go fishing. And Eric, as he backed the boat into the water, realized that he had forgotten to unhook part of the trailer from the boat. And the boat tipped over as he was entering the water, and it began to fill with water. And Feldman jumped out of the car to survey the situation to see what was going on, and he accidentally hit the electric lock on the car. Problem: keys were still in the car and the engine was still running. Everything was really a mess. Most of the live bait that had been in the boat had escaped into the water. The boat was almost full of water, and the lunches for he and the kids were effectively drowned. His natural instinct was to get angry and throw a fit, and that's certainly what his sons expected him to do based on his past practices. But suddenly he realized, and he wondered, what would Jesus do in his place? He said he realized that Jesus must have faced the same kind of a situation when he ran into those fishermen who came in, bringing their boat in, and they'd had a disappointing night of fishing. And so he encouraged them to go out again, out into the night and fish. And they came back with a whole boatload of fish. So with this thought inspiring his mind, Eric Feldman figured out how to pop open the window on his car and unlock it. Then he proceeded to unhitch the boat. And they only had 3 minnows left that they'd brought with them, but they baited their hooks anyway. And after a few minutes, Eric got a tug on his line, and about 20 minutes later, he had hauled in a very, very largemouth bass. And he and the sons were just ecstatic, because that's what they came to do, was to fish and catch the big one. All the excitement, all of the good memories never would have happened if Eric had not consciously made a decision, consciously decided to change his attitude and start over. You see, he had choices: to throw a fit or to be calm and start over. We have choices. And we're not mere puppets that are to be jerked around like a string by our emotions. We can take control. That's the first thing that we need to see. Now, there's another thing that we need to see. How we feel about ourselves often determines the choices that we make. And that's not any 21st century psychobabble. If we feel that our life does not ultimately matter, if we have allowed hope to slip out of our lives, if we believe that we are incapable of improving our situation, then we will make decisions or choices accordingly. However, if we do believe that things make a matter, that we have hope, and that we can improve our situations, then that is also going to be reflected in the choices that we make. Former President Jimmy Carter often reflects on the changes that he sees in people's lives as he volunteers for Habitat for Humanity. He says, we see extraordinary commitments and lives changed among people who have been forgotten. He tells about a Habitat family that he was aware of that lived near Washington. And they'd been living in an abandoned automobile. One of the children was an 18-year-old boy, and he was very excited about getting a new house. When the family was chosen, he jumped up and down and he said, "We won, we won." After the home was finished and the family had moved in, the little boy attended a different school than he had been attending. He had always been a slow learner, and he'd always been put in special classes for slow learners. But when he moved into the new school, his records were lost. So he was put in a class with all of the regular students. And the lowest grade he made was a B. And today he still studies with the smartest of the students. This is what happened when he had a home for the first time in his life, rather than living in an automobile. I know that Jerry Ledbetter and myself have been involved with Habitat for Humanity between both of us for several years, and others in this congregation have worked with them. And we can tell similar stories of lives that have been changed by having a home and going to school. But I want you to tell me, if you can, is it the change of houses, or was it, in this boy's case, a change of house that made a difference in how the boy had a view of himself, how he did in school? How we view ourselves is often reflected in the choices we make. Maybe that boy had a better attitude rather than just the house being responsible for his grades. You see, if we have a positive view of ourselves, we will make positive choices. If we have a negative view of ourselves, then things are not likely to work out as well. Remember, and this is the important, there is one who says to us, and each and every one of us, you are a winner. There is hope for you. By my grace, you can do it. By my grace, you can do it. There's a peanut strip in which Lucy is parked in her little psychiatric booth where she gives advice for a nickel. And Charlie Brown is sharing his problems with her. And he says, sometimes I ask myself questions. Sometimes I ask myself, is this your real life, or is this just a pilot film? Is my life a 39-week series, or is it a special? In no time at all, Lucy analyzes Charlie's problem, and as always, she gives an instant answer. Her answer in this case is, whatever it is, she says, your ratings are down. 5 cents, please. John Tall Murphy, in his book, Made to be Mastered, writes, without Lucy's special permission, I want to answer every Charlie Brown in the world. Yes, this is your real life. No, it is not a pilot, but it is special. It is very special. And why is it special? It's special because Christ died in your behalf. Why do good people do stupid things? Nobody knows all the answers, but we do know this. We always have a choice. The choices we make reflect how we feel about ourselves. But there is one who tells us that our lives are special, that the choices we make do matter, and that there is always hope.